Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Damon Barlow stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard. At 42, he commanded respect in every room he entered. His construction empire, Barlow Industries, had built half the skyline he now surveyed. Success hadn't come easy. It was carved from determination, calculated risks, and an unwavering principle. Loyalty was everything, and betrayal was unforgivable. 16 years ago, he'd married Vivian Gates at the height of his company's expansion. She was 26 then, beautiful and ambitious, working as a marketing coordinator for a rival firm. Their courtship was a whirlwind of corporate events and stolen moments between board meetings. Vivian understood his drive because she shared it, or so he believed. The early years were golden. Vivian transitioned from her career to managing their social life, and later their home when their son Mitchell was born 14 years ago. Then came their daughter Elena, now 12. Damon provided everything. The mansion in Hillcrest Estates, private schools, European vacations, and a lifestyle most could only dream of. But success bred complacency, and Damon had been traveling more frequently, closing deals across 3 states. He trusted Vivian implicitly. She managed their household, their children's schedules, and the charitable foundation they'd established together. Trust, he would soon learn, was a luxury he could no longer afford. Dr. Gerald Hansen entered their lives 2 years ago when Elena developed anxiety issues. The family therapist came highly recommended, with degrees from prestigious universities and a practice that catered to affluent families. At 38, Gerald was charming, well-spoken, and seemingly devoted to helping families communicate better. The therapy sessions started as family meetings, then shifted to individual sessions for Elena, and eventually included couples counseling when Damon and Vivian began experiencing tension over his travel schedule. Gerald was professional, insightful, and gradually became someone Vivian confided in about everything. Her feelings of loneliness, her concerns about Damon's absence, her fears about their marriage growing distant. What Damon didn't know was that Gerald's interest in their family dynamics went far beyond professional boundaries. The doctor had studied Damon's success, his habits, his weaknesses. Gerald wasn't just treating the Barlow family. He was infiltrating it methodically and deliberately. The first red flag should have been Vivian's sudden interest in individual growth. She started attending weekend workshops that Gerald recommended, reading books he suggested, and spending long hours discussing her emotional journey with him during extended therapy sessions. Damon, consumed with a major project in Phoenix, dismissed these changes as positive steps towards self-improvement. The second red flag was Mitchell's behavior. Their 14-year-old son, once eager to share his day with his father, became withdrawn and hostile. When Damon tried to engage him in conversation, Mitchell would retreat to his room or seek out his mother. Elena, meanwhile, seemed to worship Gerald, constantly quoting his advice and asking when she'd see Dr. Gerald again. Damon's instincts, honed by years of reading people in business negotiations, whispered warnings he chose to ignore. He loved his family and trusted them completely. That trust would prove to be his greatest vulnerability. The house felt different when he returned from trips. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Vivian's phone buzzed constantly with messages she quickly dismissed as foundation business or scheduling for the kids. The intimacy they'd shared for 16 years grew cold, replaced by perfunctory kisses and conversations about logistics. But Damon was a man who built his empire by paying attention to details others missed. When the foundation received an unexpectedly large donation from an anonymous source, exactly the amount Gerald charged for his premium therapy packages, Damon's suspicions crystallized into certainty. The truth, when it finally surfaced, would shatter everything he'd built and believed in. More importantly, it would awaken something dark and calculating in Damon Barlow that had been dormant for years, a side of him that his enemies in business had feared, but his family had never seen. Chapter 2. cracks in the foundation. 3 months before the baby incident that would change everything, Damon began his investigation. Unlike the emotional confrontations that destroyed most marriages, Damon approached his wife's betrayal like a business acquisition, methodically gathering intelligence before making his move. He hired Marcus Reed, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who specialized in discreet domestic surveillance. Marcus's reports arrived weekly, each one adding another piece to a puzzle that revealed the depth of Vivian and Gerald's deception. The affair had been ongoing for 8 months. They met at Gerald's office after hours, at upscale hotels during Damon's business trips, and even in Damon's own home when he was away. The surveillance photos were clinical in their clarity. Vivian entering Gerald's office building at 9 p.m., leaving at midnight. Gerald's Mercedes parked 3 blocks from the Barlow residence on afternoons when Damon was supposedly in meetings across town. But the betrayal ran deeper than adultery. Gerald had been systematically poisoning Damon's children against him. During their individual sessions, he planted seeds of doubt about their father's love, his priorities, his commitment to the family. He positioned himself as the understanding male figure who truly cared about their emotional well-being, while painting Damon as distant and work-obsessed. Mitchell's hostility now made perfect sense. Gerald had convinced the 14-year-old that his father's frequent travel meant he cared more about money than family. Elena's hero worship of Gerald was equally orchestrated. The doctor had made himself indispensable to her emotional stability, creating a dependency that served his agenda. The most damning evidence came from Gerald's own digital communications. The man was meticulous about his professional life, but careless with his personal devices. Marcus's technical specialist uncovered text message exchanges between Gerald and Vivian that revealed their long-term plans. They intended to wait until Elena turned 18. Then Vivian would file for divorce, claiming Damon's workaholism and emotional absence had destroyed their marriage. Gerald would testify as her therapist about the psychological damage done to the family. With Damon's substantial assets and Gerald's professional testimony, Vivian expected to receive primary custody of the children and a settlement that would set them up for life. Gerald's practice would benefit from the high-profile case, establishing him as an expert in wealthy family dynamics. They'd even discussed moving to California together once the divorce was finalized. Reading those messages in his study late one night, Damon felt something cold and predatory awaken inside him. These people weren't just betraying him. They were stealing his children's love, manipulating his family's emotions, and planning to financially destroy him in the process. They turned his own trust and generosity into weapons against him. But Damon was a man who'd built an empire by thinking 10 moves ahead of his competitors. If Vivian and Gerald wanted to play a long game, he'd show them what a true strategist could accomplish. The irony wasn't lost on him that Vivian was now 3 months pregnant with what would be their 3rd child. She'd announced the pregnancy with apparent joy, though Damon noticed Gerald's increased attention during that period. The timing raised questions that DNA testing would eventually answer. But for now, Damon played the excited, expectant father while planning his retribution. He began establishing his own narrative. Where Vivian sought distant workaholism, Damon would demonstrate devoted family commitment. He reduced his travel schedule, attended Elena's soccer games, helped Mitchell with his homework, and showered Vivian with attention and gifts. To outside observers, the Barlows appeared to be a family strengthened by their upcoming addition. Meanwhile, Damon quietly restructured his assets, moving money through legitimate business transactions into accounts and investments that would be difficult to trace or claim in a divorce proceeding. He documented every instance of Gerald's boundary violations, every inappropriate communication, every ethical breach that could destroy the doctor's career and credibility. The pregnancy progressed normally. Vivian glowed with what everyone assumed was maternal happiness, though Damon suspected much of her joy came from secret communications with Gerald about their future together. The doctor had even begun subtly preparing Mitchell and Elena for their parents' eventual separation, framing it as a positive change that would make everyone happier. But as Vivian entered her 3rd trimester, Damon made a discovery that shifted his plans from financial and emotional warfare to something far more personal and devastating. The truth would surface in a hospital room 3 days after their baby's birth, captured on security footage that would reveal the true depths of the betrayal surrounding his family. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Little Dominic Barlow entered the world on a snowy February morning, 8 pounds and 2 ounces of apparent perfection. Damon held his son for the first time in the delivery room, studying the infant's features with the careful attention he'd learned to apply to every important detail in his life. Something about the baby's facial structure nagged at him, but newborns often look different than they would in a few months. Vivian recovered well from the delivery, accepting congratulations from friends and family who visited the private maternity suite. Gerald made an appearance under the guise of checking on the family's emotional adjustment to their new addition. He spent 20 minutes discussing the importance of family bonding and the psychological impact of a new sibling on Mitchell and Elena. Damon watched the interaction carefully, noting how Gerald's eyes lingered on the baby with an intensity that seemed unprofessional. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. Damon split his time between the hospital and home, ensuring Mitchell and Elena felt included in welcoming their new brother. He noticed their reactions were subdued, polite, but not enthusiastic. When he questioned them about their feelings, both children gave responses that sounded rehearsed, as if they'd been coached on appropriate reactions. On the 3rd day, Damon stepped out of Vivian's room to take a business call from his Phoenix project manager. The conversation lasted 40 minutes as they discussed a setback that required his immediate attention. When he returned to the room, chaos erupted. Vivian was screaming. Nurses rushed past him toward the nursery. The heart monitor attached to baby Dominic was flatlined. Within seconds, the room filled with medical personnel performing CPR on the 3-day-old infant. Damon watched in horror as doctors worked frantically to restart his son's heart, pumping the tiny chest with careful precision while Vivian sobbed uncontrollably. After 23 minutes that felt like hours, Dominic's heart began beating again. The baby was rushed to the NICU, connected to monitors and breathing apparatus. Doctors explained that they'd caught the cardiac arrest quickly enough to prevent brain damage, but they couldn't explain what had caused an apparently healthy newborn to go into cardiac arrest without warning. While Vivian remained in the maternity ward under sedation, Damon kept vigil beside Dominic's incubator. The baby's vital signs stabilized, and doctors grew cautiously optimistic about his recovery. But the mystery of what had triggered the cardiac arrest remained unsolved. 2 hours later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of hospital security, approached Damon in the family conference room. Her expression was grave as she gestured toward a laptop computer. "Sir, please look at the nursery's security footage," she said quietly. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. The nursery was dimly lit, with only 2 nurses on duty at the station 30 feet from the infant's cribs. A figure in scrubs and a surgical cap moved purposefully toward Dominic's bassinet, checking over their shoulder to ensure the nurses remained focused on their paperwork. Damon watched the figure lean over his son's crib, seeming to adjust something near the baby's head. The person's movements were deliberate and practiced, not the gentle checking of a concerned medical professional. After 90 seconds, the figure straightened up and walked calmly toward the nursery exit. "Can you enhance the image when they turn toward the camera?" Damon asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Dr. Mitchell clicked several keys, zooming in and adjusting the contrast. As the figure passed under the security light near the door, they turned slightly and the camera captured their profile. Gerald Hansen's face filled the screen. Damon's vision blurred as the full implications crashed over him. Gerald hadn't just been sleeping with his wife and manipulating his children. He'd attempted to murder his newborn son. The cardiac arrest wasn't a medical mystery. It was attempted infanticide committed by a man who saw the baby as an obstacle to his plans with Vivian. When Damon saw Gerald's face clearly on that security footage, his legs gave out and he collapsed into the chair behind him. But it wasn't from shock or grief. It was from the overwhelming rush of pure, calculated fury that flooded his system. Every instinct he'd developed in business, every ruthless decision he'd made to build his empire, every dark capability he'd kept carefully controlled suddenly focused on a single objective. Gerald Hansen had tried to kill his child. And for that, both Gerald and Vivian would pay a price that would make their current betrayal seem like a minor inconvenience. The hospital security footage was damning, but Damon's mind was already working beyond the immediate legal implications. The police would arrest Gerald, certainly, but the justice system was slow and imperfect. Gerald might claim mental illness, accept a plea bargain, or serve a reduced sentence. Vivian might deny knowledge of the attempt, claiming she was an innocent victim of Gerald's obsession. That wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. As Damon sat in that conference room, watching the security footage replay Gerald's attempted murder of his infant son, he made a decision that would determine the fate of everyone who had betrayed him. The legal system would handle Gerald's crime, but Damon Barlow would handle something far more comprehensive: complete and total destruction of everything Gerald and Vivian valued, loved, or hoped to achieve. They'd made the mistake of assuming he was just a wealthy businessman who'd roll over when confronted with divorce papers and custody battles. They were about to learn that beneath his civilized exterior lived something far more dangerous than they'd imagined. Chapter 4. The Investigation. The police arrested Gerald Hansen 6 hours after Damon provided the security footage. Detective Raymond Jones led the investigation, treating the case as attempted murder against an infant. Gerald's initial denials crumbled when presented with the video evidence, but his explanation was carefully crafted. "I was checking on the baby because Vivian called me, concerned about his breathing," Gerald claimed during interrogation. "I'm a trained professional with experience in infant psychology. I was trying to help." It was a lie designed to create reasonable doubt, but Damon knew the truth ran deeper. While the police focused on building their criminal case, Damon launched his own investigation into Gerald's background, financial situation, and professional history. Marcus Reed's expanded investigation revealed disturbing patterns in Gerald's past. 3 previous clients had filed ethics complaints against him for boundary violations, though none had been substantiated due to insufficient evidence. 2 wealthy female clients had divorced their husbands shortly after beginning therapy with Gerald, and both had later married men who bore striking resemblances to the doctor. More damning was Gerald's financial situation. Despite his successful practice and high fees, Gerald was drowning in debt. He made several disastrous investments in cryptocurrency and day trading, losing nearly $200,000 in the past year. His medical malpractice insurance had lapsed, his office lease was 3 months behind, and he owed significant money to several high-end creditors. The timeline became clear. Gerald had targeted the Barlow family not just for Vivian's beauty and availability, but for Damon's wealth. The affair was a calculated business decision designed to secure Gerald's financial future through Vivian's eventual divorce settlement. But the baby changed everything. If Dominic was Damon's biological son, Vivian's divorce settlement would be reduced by the presence of a 3rd child and the additional financial obligations. Worse, if the baby's paternity was questioned and proved to be Gerald's, the entire plan would collapse under the weight of scandal and malpractice suits. DNA testing confirmed Damon's suspicions. Dominic was Gerald's biological son, not Damon's. The affair had produced a child that threatened to expose everything, so Gerald had decided to eliminate the evidence permanently. While Gerald sat in county jail awaiting trial, Vivian played the role of traumatized victim. She visited him daily, professing her love and planning his defense strategy. She hired Clayton Marsh, the city's most expensive criminal defense attorney, using money from accounts she'd slowly been draining during the affair. Vivian's performance was masterful. She presented herself as a confused woman who'd been manipulated by an unethical therapist. She claimed Gerald had taken advantage of her emotional vulnerability during Damon's frequent absences, gradually breaking down her psychological defenses until she'd lost the ability to think clearly. To the outside world, she appeared to be the secondary victim of Gerald's crimes. Friends and family rallied around her, offering support during her traumatic realization that her therapist had been manipulating her family for months. Even Mitchell and Elena seemed to buy into their mother's victim narrative, angry at Gerald for tricking them about their father's love. But Damon saw through the performance. Marcus's surveillance revealed that Vivian was still communicating with Gerald through a complex system involving his defense attorney. She was actively helping to coordinate his defense strategy while maintaining her public facade of betrayed innocence. The criminal case proceeded slowly. Gerald's trial was scheduled for 8 months away, giving Damon time to implement a more comprehensive form of justice. He realized that sending Gerald to prison, while satisfying, wasn't enough. Gerald would serve his time, possibly get early release, and eventually rebuild his life. Vivian would divorce Damon, take half his assets, and start fresh with someone new. That scenario was unacceptable. During this period, Damon made another discovery that changed his entire approach to revenge. While reviewing Gerald's professional files that had been subpoenaed for the trial, he found detailed psychological profiles Gerald had compiled on Damon's family. The documents revealed that Gerald had been studying them for over a year before the affair began, identifying weaknesses and pressure points he could exploit. Gerald had targeted Elena's anxiety issues, deliberately exacerbating them to create dependency on his therapy. He'd manipulated Mitchell's normal teenage rebellion, channeling it into resentment against Damon. He'd studied Vivian's personality, her needs, her fears, and had crafted a seduction strategy as methodical as any business plan. Reading those clinical assessments of his family's psychological vulnerabilities, Damon felt the last vestiges of mercy drain from his soul. Gerald hadn't just betrayed their trust. He'd weaponized their emotions and used his professional training to systematically destroy their family from within. If Gerald wanted to play psychological warfare, Damon would show him what real psychological destruction looked like. Chapter 5. Laying the Trap. While Gerald remained in jail and Vivian maintained her victim act, Damon began implementing a plan that would destroy both of them completely. The legal system would handle Gerald's attempted murder charge, but Damon's justice would be far more comprehensive and permanent. First, he addressed his children. Mitchell and Elena had been psychologically manipulated for months, their relationships with their father damaged by Gerald's systematic campaign of alienation. Rather than confront them with the truth immediately, Damon employed a family therapist of his own, Dr. Joyce Atkins, a renowned specialist in cult deprogramming and psychological manipulation recovery. Dr. Atkins worked carefully to undo Gerald's conditioning without traumatizing the children further. Through guided conversations and therapeutic techniques, she helped Mitchell and Elena recognize how their thoughts and feelings about their father had been artificially influenced. The process was slow and painful, but gradually both children began to remember their father's love and question the negative narrative Gerald had planted in their minds. Mitchell's breakthrough came first. During a session with Dr. Atkins, he broke down crying as he realized how Gerald had twisted his normal teenage frustrations into hatred for his father. "He made me feel like Dad didn't love me," Mitchell sobbed. "But Dad was always there for the important stuff. Gerald he made me focus on the wrong things." Elena's recovery was more complex due to her younger age and deeper emotional dependency on Gerald. But as she worked through her feelings with Dr. Atkins, she began to understand that the doctor had made her anxiety worse, not better, creating problems he could then solve to make himself seem indispensable. With his children's healing underway, Damon turned his attention to Gerald's complete destruction. The attempted murder charge would likely result in a 10 to 15-year prison sentence, but Damon wanted to ensure Gerald emerged from prison with absolutely nothing to return to. Using his business connections and financial resources, Damon systematically dismantled Gerald's life. He purchased Gerald's outstanding debts at significant discounts, then called them in simultaneously, forcing Gerald into bankruptcy even before his trial began. He arranged for Gerald's professional license to be permanently revoked through formal ethics complaints supported by newly discovered evidence of his pattern of client manipulation. But Damon's most elegant destruction involved Gerald's family. The doctor had parents in their 70s who lived comfortably on their retirement savings and the small monthly assistance Gerald had been providing. Gerald also had a younger sister, Janet Hansen, who worked as a nurse and had always looked up to her brother as the family success story. Damon approached them as a concerned victim, seeking to understand Gerald's psychological profile for the criminal trial. He presented himself as a man trying to comprehend how a trusted family therapist could attempt to murder an infant. Gerald's parents were devastated to learn about their son's crimes, but they still believed he might be mentally ill rather than genuinely evil. That changed when Damon provided them with evidence of Gerald's calculated seduction of multiple wealthy clients over the years. Gerald wasn't sick. He was a predator who used his professional credentials to exploit vulnerable families. The revelation destroyed his parents' faith in him completely. They publicly disowned him, refusing to attend his trial or provide character testimony for his defense. Janet's reaction was even more devastating to Gerald. As a medical professional herself, she understood the ethical violations Gerald had committed. When she learned that her brother had deliberately exacerbated a child's anxiety disorder for his own purposes, she filed formal complaints with every medical board and professional organization Gerald had ever been associated with. More importantly, Janet began reaching out to Gerald's former clients, helping them understand that their family problems might have been artificially created or worsened by Gerald's manipulations. Several families filed civil lawsuits against Gerald, seeking damages for the psychological harm he'd caused their children. By the time Gerald's criminal trial began, he faced not only the attempted murder charge, but also multiple civil suits, complete professional ruin, and total rejection by his family. His defense attorney, Clayton Marsh, advised him to accept a plea bargain, but Gerald's narcissism wouldn't allow him to admit guilt. Meanwhile, Vivian continued her performance as the manipulated victim, but Damon had been carefully documenting her ongoing communications with Gerald and her efforts to help his defense. When the time was right, he would expose her true role in Gerald's schemes. The trap was nearly complete. Gerald would lose everything: his freedom, his career, his family, his future. But for Vivian, Damon had something special planned. She'd betrayed him, manipulated their children, and participated in a plan that ultimately led to an attempt on their baby's life. For that, her punishment would be uniquely devastating and permanently public. Chapter 6: The Revelation. Gerald's trial began on a crisp October morning, 8 months after his arrest. The courthouse was packed with media, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. A respected family therapist accused of attempting to murder an infant patient. Clayton Marsh had built Gerald's defense around a claim of diminished capacity, arguing that financial stress and a psychological breakdown had caused his client to act irrationally. Damon attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row where Gerald could see him. Vivian sat beside him, playing the supportive wife standing by her husband during their family's darkest hour. To observers, they appear to be presenting a united front despite the betrayal that had torn their family apart. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Security footage showed Gerald entering the nursery and tampering with baby Dominic's breathing apparatus, leading directly to the cardiac arrest. Medical experts testified that the baby's airway had been deliberately obstructed, and that only the quick response of hospital staff had prevented his death. Gerald's defense claimed he had been trying to help the baby, not harm him. They painted him as a dedicated professional who had become emotionally invested in the Barlow family's welfare. Clayton Marsh argued that Gerald's actions, while inappropriate, were motivated by concern rather than malice. The defense strategy might have worked if not for the evidence Damon had been carefully preparing. On the trial's 4th day, the prosecution called an unexpected witness, Dr. Eric Charles, a forensic psychiatrist who had been analyzing Gerald's professional files and personal communications. Dr. Charles presented a devastating psychological profile of Gerald as a calculating predator who had systematically targeted wealthy families for financial exploitation. The affair with Vivian wasn't a crime of passion, but a calculated business decision. The attempt on Dominic's life wasn't a moment of psychological breakdown, but a cold-blooded effort to eliminate evidence that could expose his schemes. But the trial's most damaging moment came when the prosecution presented Gerald's private journal, discovered during a search of his home. The journal detailed his manipulation strategies, his financial motivations, and his growing frustration with Vivian's pregnancy. One entry, dated 2 weeks before Dominic's birth, was particularly damning. The baby complicates everything. If V divorces D while pregnant with my child, the paternity will be obvious and my career is finished. If the baby dies of SIDS or some medical complication, V can grieve appropriately and proceed with divorce as planned. Natural infant mortality occurs in 6 per 1,000 births. Respiratory distress is common and rarely investigated thoroughly. The journal entry revealed premeditation, planning, and a chilling calculation about murdering an infant to protect his financial schemes. Gerald's claim of diminished capacity crumbled in the face of such clear evidence of deliberate planning. During cross-examination, Gerald finally revealed his true nature. Under pressure from the prosecutor's questions, his calm facade cracked, and he began ranting about how Damon didn't deserve his family or wealth. He claimed Vivian had been wasted on a man who cared more about business than relationships, and that he could have given her the emotional connection she needed. The outburst confirmed what Damon had suspected. Gerald's motivations went beyond money. He genuinely believed he was entitled to Damon's life, his wife, his success. The attempted murder wasn't just about eliminating evidence. It was about clearing the path to claim what he thought should be his. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Gerald was convicted of attempted murder, child endangerment, and professional misconduct. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. As Gerald was led away in shackles, he turned toward the gallery where Damon sat. Instead of remorse or defeat, Gerald's expression showed pure hatred. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. "You can't watch her forever." That threat sealed Vivian's fate. Damon had been considering showing her mercy, possibly offering a quiet divorce with minimal financial consequences if she agreed to supervised visitation with the children. But Gerald's words revealed that Vivian remained loyal to him, that she would likely attempt to help him even from prison. Outside the courthouse, Vivian played her role perfectly for the assembled media. She spoke about forgiveness, about the importance of mental health treatment, and about her family's commitment to healing from the trauma Gerald had caused them. But Damon knew the truth. Marcus's surveillance had confirmed that Vivian had been funneling money to Gerald's commissary account, communicating with him through coded messages and letters supposedly meant for his lawyer, and even discussing plans for his eventual appeal. The criminal trial was over, but Damon's justice was just beginning. Gerald would spend the next 15 years in prison, but when he emerged, he would find that Damon's revenge had only grown more sophisticated and devastating with time. And for Vivian, who had orchestrated this betrayal from the beginning and remained committed to Gerald even after his attempted murder of their child, Damon had prepared a revelation that would destroy her reputation, her relationships, and her future completely. Chapter 7. The Setup. 6 months after Gerald's conviction, life at the Barlow mansion had settled into a deceptive normalcy. Vivian continued her performance as the repentant wife grateful for her family's forgiveness, while Damon played the role of a husband committed to rebuilding their marriage. To their children and the outside world, the Barlows appeared to be healing from their ordeal stronger than ever. Mitchell and Elena, now fully recovered from Gerald's psychological manipulation through Dr. Atkins' therapy, had rekindled their relationships with their father. Mitchell, now 15, spent his afternoons working alongside Damon at various construction sites, learning the business that would someday be his inheritance. Elena, 13, had returned to her previous confidence and achievement in school, her anxiety issues resolved once Gerald's artificial amplification was removed. Baby Dominic, now 8 months old, thrived despite his traumatic start. DNA testing had confirmed Gerald's paternity, but Damon raised the boy as his own son, never treating him differently than Mitchell and Elena. In public and private, Damon was the perfect father figure, though he maintained careful emotional distance from a child who would never truly be his. Vivian interpreted Damon's apparent acceptance of the situation as forgiveness, perhaps even weakness. She began testing boundaries, staying out late for charity meetings, taking mysterious phone calls she claimed were from attorneys handling civil suits against Gerald, and showing subtle signs of her old entitlement and manipulation. What Vivian didn't know was that Damon had spent the past 6 months creating an elaborate trap designed to expose her true nature to everyone who mattered. Every friend, family member, business associate, and social connection would witness her complete moral collapse in a setting that would make denial impossible. The plan centered around the Barlow Foundation's annual charity gala, traditionally held at the Grand Ballroom of the Hilton downtown. This year's event would honor families affected by medical malpractice, with proceeds supporting victims of professional misconduct. The irony wasn't lost on Damon that Vivian would be hosting an event condemning exactly the type of behavior she'd enabled and supported. Damon spent months planning every detail. The guest list included 400 of the city's most influential residents, politicians, business leaders, medical professionals, and social figures whose opinions shaped public discourse. Also invited were several of Gerald's former clients who had suffered from his manipulations, Dr. Joyce Adkins, who had treated the Barlow children, and Detective Raymond Jones, who had investigated Gerald's crimes. The evening's program would include testimonials from families victimized by professional misconduct, presentations by experts on psychological manipulation, and a special tribute to children who had survived attempts on their lives by trusted caregivers. Every element was designed to create a context that would make Vivian's betrayal seem particularly heinous. But the centerpiece of Damon's plan was a multimedia presentation he'd been preparing for months. Working with a professional documentary team, he'd compiled a comprehensive record of Vivian's affair, her financial manipulations, her ongoing support for Gerald even after his conviction, and her role in facilitating the attempted murder of their infant son. The presentation included audio recordings of Vivian's phone conversations with Gerald's legal team, video surveillance of her meeting with Gerald associates to coordinate support for his appeal, and financial records showing how she'd systematically stolen money from their joint accounts to fund Gerald's defense and commissary account. Most damning were the love letters Vivian had written to Gerald while he awaited trial, expressing her continued devotion and promising to wait for his release. In one particularly revealing letter, she wrote, "What happened to the baby was unfortunate, but I understand you were protecting our future together. 20 years isn't forever, and I'll make sure you have something to come home to." The letter proved that Vivian not only knew about Gerald's premeditation, but supported his decision to attempt murder as a means of protecting their relationship. Damon had also arranged for special guests who would amplify the evening's impact. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital security chief who had discovered Gerald's crime, would present findings about how often trusted medical professionals violated their positions to harm patients. Representatives from the state medical board would discuss new protocols for identifying predatory behavior among therapists and doctors. The evening would begin with cocktails and silent auction bidding, followed by dinner and the formal program. Damon's presentation would be introduced as a special segment honoring families who had survived betrayal by trusted professionals. By the time the audience realized they were watching Vivian's exposure in real time, it would be too late for her to escape or minimize the damage. Every major local media outlet would be present, ostensibly to cover the charity event, but actually positioned to document Vivian's public destruction. The story would dominate local news for weeks, ensuring that her reputation would be permanently destroyed throughout their social and professional circles. But Damon's plan extended beyond public humiliation. Legal documents had been prepared to file for divorce immediately after the gala, citing adultery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Vivian would be presented with papers that would strip her of custody rights, financial claims, and even access to their shared residences. The trap was set. In 48 hours, at the charity gala she believed would rehabilitate her public image, Vivian would face complete and total destruction of everything she'd built through 16 years of marriage. Chapter 8. The Execution. The grand ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gold accents as 400 guests arrived for the Barlow Foundation's annual charity gala. Vivian moved through the crowd like a gracious hostess, accepting compliments on her resilience and strength during her family's difficult year. She wore a stunning midnight blue gown that Damon had specially commissioned, unaware that it would be the last expensive item he would ever purchase for her. Damon watched his wife work the room, noting how easily she slipped into her role as the perfect society wife. She spoke passionately about supporting victims of professional misconduct, her voice carrying just the right note of personal experience without seeming self-pitying. Several guests commented to Damon about how fortunate he was to have such a strong, forgiving woman by his side. "She's truly remarkable," Senator William Hayes told Damon during cocktails. "To forgive and move forward after what that doctor did to your family takes extraordinary character." Damon smiled and nodded appropriately, knowing that in less than 2 hours, Senator Hayes would understand exactly what kind of character Vivian actually possessed. The evening proceeded flawlessly through cocktails and dinner. The silent auction raised over $200,000 for victim support services. Guest speakers included Dr. Joyce Adkins discussing the psychological recovery process for families affected by professional misconduct, and Detective Raymond Jones outlining how law enforcement identifies and prosecutes trusted individuals who abuse their positions. Each presentation built toward the emotional crescendo that would make Vivian's exposure even more devastating. The audience was primed to feel outrage toward anyone who would exploit professional trust or endanger children. At 9:47 p.m., Damon approached the podium to introduce the evening's special presentation. The lights dimmed as he began speaking. "Tonight, we've heard from experts about how predators exploit professional relationships to harm the families who trust them," Damon began, his voice steady and authoritative. "But understanding this evil requires more than academic discussion. It requires examining real cases, real victims, and real consequences." The large screens flanking the stage displayed the Barlow Foundation logo as Damon continued. "What you're about to see is a comprehensive examination of how one family, my family, was systematically destroyed by individuals who violated every principle of professional ethics and human decency. This presentation contains disturbing content, but truth often disturbs us. And tonight, truth serves justice." Vivian, seated at the head table, smiled proudly as the audience prepared to watch what she assumed would be a tasteful documentary about their family's recovery from Gerald's crimes. She had no idea that Marcus Reed's investigation team had spent months preparing a minute-by-minute chronicle of her betrayal. The presentation began with Gerald's first appointment with the Barlow family, showing how he had studied their vulnerabilities and crafted a manipulation strategy. Hidden cameras Marcus had installed months earlier revealed Gerald's true behavior during therapy sessions, cold calculation masked by professional concern. But the audience's shocked murmurs turned to gasps when the presentation shifted to Vivian's role in the conspiracy. Audio recordings revealed her discussions with Gerald about Damon's travel schedule, their children's emotional needs, and their marriage's weaknesses. Far from being Gerald's victim, Vivian was clearly his partner and collaborator. Vivian's face went white as her own voice filled the ballroom, recorded during conversation with Gerald 3 weeks before Dominic's birth. "Damon's in Phoenix until Friday. The baby's due next week, and after that, we can start planning our exit strategy. I've been documenting his emotional absence for months. Dr. Adkins will testify that his workaholism damaged the children's psychological development." The presentation continued with surveillance footage of Vivian meeting with Gerald's associates during his trial, providing them with money and information to support his defense. Bank records showed systematic theft from family accounts to fund Gerald's legal expenses and commissary funds. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. The screens displayed Vivian's love letters to Gerald, written after his conviction and sentencing. Her own handwriting condemned her completely. My darling Gerald, I know what you did to protect our future, and I love you more for having the courage to take action. Damon will never understand what we have together. 20 years will pass quickly, and I'll make sure you have a family and a life to return to. Our love is worth any sacrifice. 400 guests sat in stunned silence as they realized they were witnessing Vivian's complete exposure in real time. She had not only enabled Gerald's attempted murder of an infant, but had praised him for it, promising to wait for his release from prison. The presentation concluded with audio from Gerald's private phone calls from prison, recorded legally under the prison system's monitoring policies. In these conversations, Gerald and Vivian discussed plans for his appeal, strategies for rebuilding their lives together after his release, and Vivian's ongoing manipulation of Damon's forgiveness. As the lights came up, Damon returned to the podium while Vivian sat frozen in her chair, unable to speak or move. 400 pairs of eyes focused on her with expressions of disgust, horror, and betrayal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damon said quietly, "you have just witnessed what true professional misconduct looks like. Not just from Dr. Gerald Hansen, who attempted to murder my infant son, but from my wife, who enabled his crimes and continues to support him today." Two law enforcement officers, invited guests who had been briefed earlier, approached Vivian's table with arrest warrants. She was being charged as an accessory after the fact to attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The charges wouldn't result in significant prison time, but they would ensure her complete social and legal destruction. As Vivian was escorted from the ballroom in handcuffs, the 400 guests, politicians, business leaders, socialites, and media representatives bore witness to the most complete public downfall they had ever seen. Her reputation was destroyed not just with rumors or allegations, but with undeniable evidence presented in front of everyone who mattered in their community. The story would dominate news cycles for weeks. Vivian's supporters would abandon her, her social connections would evaporate, and her future would be permanently scarred by the public record of her betrayal and moral corruption. But for Damon, the evening's success was just the beginning of a more comprehensive destruction that would follow Vivian for the rest of her life. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. 3 weeks after the gala, Vivian sat in a sparse apartment across town, her fall from grace complete and irreversible. The luxury of the Hillcrest mansion had been replaced by a 2-bedroom rental in a middle-class neighborhood, paid for by the minimal allowance Damon provided through court-ordered temporary support. The criminal charges against her had been resolved through a plea bargain that resulted in 2 years probation, community service, and a felony record that would follow her forever. But the legal consequences were insignificant compared to the social and financial destruction Damon had orchestrated. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly once Vivian's betrayal became public knowledge. With video evidence of her adultery, documented theft of marital assets, and proof of her support for Gerald's attempted murder, Vivian had no leverage to negotiate. She received minimal support, enough to survive, but never enough to live comfortably again. Mitchell and Elena, now fully understanding their mother's role in their family's destruction, chose to live with their father full-time. The court granted Damon sole custody of all 3 children, including baby Dominic, despite the boy's paternity. Vivian was granted supervised visitation for 2 hours every other weekend, but even that was contingent on her continued psychological evaluation and good behavior. The social destruction was even more complete. Every friend Vivian had cultivated during 16 years of marriage cut contact with her immediately after the gala. Charity organizations removed her from their boards. The country club revoked her membership. Her former social circle treated her as if she had died, erasing her completely from their lives and conversations. Financial devastation followed social exile. With her reputation destroyed, Vivian couldn't find employment in any field that required background checks or professional references. She worked part-time at a retail store, earning barely enough to pay rent and basic expenses. The designer clothes, luxury cars, and pampered lifestyle she'd enjoyed as Damon's wife became memories of a life she could never reclaim. But Damon's most elegant revenge involved Gerald's ultimate fate in prison. Using his business connections and understanding of how institutional power worked, Damon had ensured that Gerald's time behind bars would be particularly difficult. Gerald had been sent to Millbrook Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison 3 hours from the city. Through careful arrangement, he'd been placed in general population rather than protective custody, despite the nature of his crimes against children. His cellmate was Bruce Knox, a man serving 15 years for aggravated assault who had 3 young daughters and very strong opinions about people who hurt children. Gerald's professional arrogance and condescending attitude toward other inmates made him universally despised within the prison community. His attempts to establish himself as an educated man deserving respect were met with violence and humiliation. Within 6 months, Gerald had been hospitalized 3 times for injuries sustained in accidents that corrections officers seemed unable to prevent or investigate effectively. The commissary funds Vivian had been providing were cut off when her financial situation collapsed, leaving Gerald without the resources needed to buy protection or basic comforts. His letters to her went unanswered as she struggled with her own survival and had no money to maintain their correspondence. Dr. Joyce Atkins continued treating Mitchell and Elena, helping them process their feelings about their mother's betrayal while strengthening their relationship with their father. Both children thrived academically and socially. Their emotional stability restored once Gerald's manipulation was completely eliminated from their lives. Dominic, now approaching his first birthday, remained in Damon's care. Despite knowing the boy wasn't his biological son, Damon provided appropriate care and attention, though he maintained emotional distance. The child would grow up knowing who his real father was, but also understanding that Damon had chosen to raise him when that father attempted to murder him as an infant. 1 year after the gala, Damon received a letter from Gerald in prison. The man who had once carried himself with professional confidence and intellectual superiority now wrote in desperate, barely legible handwriting. Mr. Barlow, I know you arranged for my situation here. I'm writing to beg for your mercy. I made terrible mistakes, but I'm paying for them every day. Please consider my request for transfer to protective custody. I'm willing to sign away any rights to Dominic and never contact your family again. I just want to survive long enough to serve my sentence. Damon read the letter once, then fed it through his office shredder without responding. 2 weeks later, Gerald was found dead in his cell, apparently having hanged himself with bed sheets. The suicide note claimed he couldn't live with the guilt of what he'd attempted to do to an innocent child. Prison officials ruled it a suicide, though several inmates reported that Gerald had been receiving increasingly violent threats from other prisoners who had learned about his crimes. Vivian learned of Gerald's death through a brief news article. She attended his funeral alone, the only mourner besides his estranged family. As she stood beside his grave, she finally understood the complete scope of Damon's revenge. Gerald was dead, her life was destroyed, and there would be no recovery or second chances. 3 years after the events began, Damon stood in his office, looking out at the city skyline he had helped build. Mitchell, now 18, was preparing for college with plans to join the family business afterward. Elena, 16, excelled in academics and showed early signs of the intelligence and strength that would serve her well in life. Dominic, now 4, was a healthy, active child who called Damon Daddy and had no memory of his traumatic infancy. Vivian remained in her small apartment, working retail jobs and living paycheck to paycheck. Her attempts to rebuild her life were consistently thwarted by her reputation and criminal record. She would spend the rest of her life as a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying family loyalty. Damon had achieved complete victory. His enemies were destroyed, his children were thriving, and his business empire continued to grow. He had proven that betrayal carried consequences far beyond what most people could imagine, and that his mercy, once lost, could never be regained. The man who had built a construction empire through careful planning and ruthless execution had applied those same principles to personal justice. Vivian and Gerald had underestimated him, mistaking his love for weakness and his trust for naivety. They had learned, too late, that Damon Barlow was a man who neither forgave nor forgot. And in their complete destruction, he had sent a message that would echo through his family for generations. Loyalty was everything, and betrayal was unforgivable. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.